I want to look at this strange phrase that Peter uses. Peter was an eyewitness. He was making a specific allusion to the transfiguration when they were up there and they saw Jesus glorified. He was an eyewitness. You say, what could be more certain than that? Peter himself says he has something even more certain than that. More certain than being an eyewitness present at that time. And that's what he calls the more sure word of prophecy. What is he talking about? We're going to first take a look at prophecy, not in the sense of, gee, what's going to happen next week or next month or next year. Let's take a look at prophecies that were spelled out and came true to prove to us that God really is who he said he is. William Thompson, who later was known as Lord Kelvin, one of the great men of science, is famous for pointing out that until we measure a thing, we really know very little about it. It's one thing to point out to a little verse here, and notice how it's fulfilled there, and so forth. That's fine. But let's see if we can do that in a way that's a little more quantitative, a little more systematic. And the Old Testament, what the Jews would call the Tanakh, we're going to talk about prophecies in the Old Testament. Because there's a fact about the Old Testament you can verify for yourself with any competent encyclopedia. The Hebrew scriptures that we call the Old Testament, the Tanakh to the Jew, were translated into Greek by 270 BC. It started about 285 BC when Ptolemy Philadelphus II funded 70 scholars to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Why is that so important? Because it's a matter of history. We have copies of that work product, and they were around 3 centuries before the gospel period. That's a matter of secular record. So for the moment, we can set aside who wrote what book. Did Daniel really write Daniel? All of that. It was in black and white, in tangible form, 3 centuries before Jesus was preaching and so forth. Now, these scriptures contain over 300 prophecies detailing the coming Messiah. Over 300 prophecies that were fulfilled back in the 1st century AD. So what we're going to do is, by the way, let me give you some samples of these. And I'm not going to go 300, relax. But I'm just going to list the ones that are quoted in the New Testament as being fulfilled. Jesus was to be of David's family. You'll find that in 2 Samuel, all through the Psalms, all through Isaiah. He would be born of a virgin. That was hinted at in the Garden of Eden. And it's also confirmed to Isaiah, Isaiah 7:14. We always see that on the Christmas cards and so forth. He would be born in Bethlehem in Micah 5:2. He would sojourn in Egypt in Hosea 11:1. He would live in Galilee. In fact, he'd live in Nazareth in Isaiah. He would be announced in advance by an Elijah-type herald in Isaiah 40 and Malachi 3. In fact, the Old Testament closes with that specific promise. He would occasion the massacre of Bethlehem's children. That's mentioned in Genesis 35 and Jeremiah 31. And those are alluded, these connections aren't contrived, they are documented in the New Testament as being fulfillments of those Old Testament periods. He would proclaim a jubilee to the world. His mission would include the Gentiles. Yes, that's all through the Old Testament. His ministry would be one of healing, Isaiah emphasizes. He would teach through the use of parables for a number of reasons. He would be disbelieved and rejected by the religious rulers of that period. He would make a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. He'd be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. And he would be smitten like a shepherd, as his sheep would be scattered. He would be given vinegar and gall. They would cast lots for his garments. His side would be pierced. Not a bone would be broken. That was specified in the requirements for the Passover in Exodus 12 and in Numbers 9, and also is declared specifically messianically in Psalm 34. He would die among criminals. His dying words were foretold. He would be buried by a rich man. He would rise from the dead on the 3rd day. That's in Genesis, in the Psalms, in Jonah, Hosea, and elsewhere. And his resurrection would be followed by the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, I said these Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek 270 BC. They contain over 300 prophecies. We're going to go look at all 300 of them, right? No, relax. What we are going to do, we're going to pick the 8 simplest ones I could find. Just 8 of them. but we're going to try to quantize them as they go. We're going to look at 8 of them. The first one is probably familiar to most of our ears. It's in Micah 5:2. You remember when the Magi came to Herod? Where is he that's going to be born king of the Jews? And he had his scholars check. They dug up Micah 5:2, and they quote this verse as being prophetic of the Messiah. It says, "But thou, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting." We could spend the evening on this verse. There's so many things hidden away in this verse that's amazing. Not just that he was born in Bethlehem, but that he pre-existed from eternity past, and much more. But the point is, all we want to extract here is the fact that the Messiah be born in Bethlehem. Now I want you to stop and think about it. What's the probability of somebody being born in Bethlehem over the last 2,000 years? How can we approach that? Well, we can take a look at the world, and we can start zeroing in on that Middle East, Israel, Jerusalem. As we move into Jerusalem, we finally go south of Jerusalem. There's a place called Bethlehem, and this little town has a population of less than 7,000, pretty much unchanged through history. So what's the probability that somebody you ever might meet in the last 2,000 years was born in Bethlehem? Well, if we assume, we're going to use just round numbers and stay conservative. Let's assume that the population of Bethlehem is less than 10,000. That's a safe assumption. Let's assume that the average population at any point in time over the last 2,000 years is something in the nature of a billion people. So the probability of someone picked at random is roughly the ratio of 10,000 to 1 billion. And the way you can deal with round numbers, the scientists and engineers typically just round them off in powers of 10. So we have 10 to the 4th divided by 10 to the 9th, or putting it another way, there's one chance in 10 to the 5th, or one chance in 100,000 of meeting someone born in Bethlehem. How many of you have ever met someone born in Bethlehem? I see. We've got 1, 2, good for you. Have you visited there? Since then, you've been. That's unusual, okay. All I know is that you probably met more than 100,000 people in that sample, okay, in total number. But let's take a second one. This is a change of subject now. But it's another famous prophecy in Zechariah 9, verse 9, where the prophet says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass." Zechariah 9:9, a famous verse because Jesus deliberately fulfills this in the triumphal entry. And we'll be looking at that later. But the point is, how many people throughout history have presented themselves as a king to Jerusalem riding a donkey? Well, I have no idea, but if I said less than 1 in 100, am I being generous? I think so, okay. So I'm going to use that as my plug figure. I'm going to suggest to you someone presenting himself as a king riding a donkey, there's less than 1 in 100, all right? Now, let's go to the third one. There's another cute little phrase in Zechariah 11, where God says through Zechariah, "I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver." Okay, and obviously most of you are aware of the fact that's the precise value that Jesus was betrayed for. Question, how many people throughout history have been betrayed for that precise figure, 30 pieces of silver? Well, I don't happen to know any, but if I say less than 1 in 1,000, are we together? If I look at all the ransom issues or places people have been betrayed and somehow lump them together, I'm going to suggest there's less than 1 in 1,000 that had that specific price. Are we together? That make sense? I'm being conservative, I think. Okay. The next verse adds some additional details, so I'm going to treat it separately. "The Lord said unto me, Cast it to the potter, a goodly price that I was prized out of them. I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord." This strange little verse here. And as you read that in the Old Testament, it might not come home. When you get to the New Testament, we'll refresh your memory of what happened after Judas betrayed Jesus. "Then Judas, which betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed innocent blood." That's a remarkable statement because we know that by then Satan had entered Judas. So by Satan's own words, we declare Jesus' innocence. I think that's kind of a provocative thing, but let's go on. And the chief priest said, "What's that to us? You see to that. In other words, a deal's a deal. It's a done deal.